People who have snapped on a bully at school, what's your story? 5th grade, this dude who always picked on me was kicking my seat in a assembly, and I was having a terrible week and this was my last straw. I punched him in the face, but I wasn't satisfied with the first punch, because it felt weak, so I figured I'm already going to be in trouble, so I went back for a second better punch, that felt worth getting in trouble over. Also, this was a dare assembly, which was about saying no to drugs and violence, so I basically learned nothing. For context, I'm 6 feet 5 inches, and have been since high school. There was a girl I was friends with who had a boyfriend. There was nothing going on between us, but her boyfriend was older, and used to call me names, and throw shit at me in the halls. I'm not a particularly confrontational person, so I'll let it go on like that for a while. There was a day when he knocked my books out of my hand, and I had had enough. He wasn't nearly as big as I was, so I picked him up by his shirt and slammed him against a locker. The bullying stopped. My second in France, like 15 years old, bully decided to sit next to me in class, repeatedly whispered insults to me, and at one point I snapped, took his head, and bashed it into the desk. I think I would have been in deep shit had his textbook not been there. Needless to say, I got kicked out of that class and had to change English group. Beat mine with a hockey stick one day after school. We were playing road hockey. He lived down the street. He just kept going, and to be honest, I saw red. I just remember my dad pulling me off while I was slamming my wooden goalie stick into his side while he tried to cover his bleeding face. His parents never perused anything. My parents took me to counseling. He ended up nearly killing his best friend in a drinking and driving accident. Friend was never the same. Permanently injured. Bully killed himself a few years later after he didn't make a junior hockey team. I still feel bad. I have never been in any violent interaction before or since. Now as an adult and an educator, I know he was likely really hurting. I'm sorry, Justin. I was being bullied for like a month when I was 13 or 14. Some guy from my class started messing with me, pushing, hair grabbing, neck slapping, stuff like that, and I didn't know how to handle it. One of his friends from another class, a guy I had never spoken to before, tried it once, and I instinctively punched him in the face. Bullying stopped. If that random guy didn't do what he did, I don't know how I would have put an end to it, to be honest. In 4th grade, this kid named Nick used to punch me every day at recess. I went home one day crying about it, and my dad told me to punch him back. So the next day when Nick came around to punch me, I whipped around and just beat the snot out of him. Absolutely wailed on him. One of the teachers noticed and took us to the principal's office, and we got off with warnings. After that, Nick never punched me again, but would make sure I could get to the front of the line for the drinking fountain, and picked me first for any sports game he was team captain for. I was 7, and I was a nice kid with average grades, and this one bully that was taller than me. He used to be any typical bully, like trip you on your lunch and push your head for no apparent reason. I was getting annoyed that I felt the red heat go all over my body. I looked at him and told him to stop. I looked at him. He pushes me to the ground. I stopped and kicked his tables and punched his nose with all my force. His nose started to bleed, and I was sent to the office. My mom had this thing where, if they started it, then she'll pretend that she's mad at me at school and come home saying congrats. I had been bullied all year long by this guy, and it was the last week of 8th or 9th grade. Comes up to me and says something about my clothes or something, and I just saw red. I turned around and hit him with a palm strike to the face. The bottom of my hand connected right under his nose. He doubled over and I bolted. I heard later his lip got stuck in his braces and he had to go to the doctor to fix it. I got a stern talking to about not hitting people, although my teachers were aware of the verbal bullying. I didn't snap a bully, but I did snap at a teacher who didn't do anything, no matter how many times I told her I was being bullied. All my bullies, their parents were on the parent council. They got funding for field trips and things like that, so the kids were basically untouchable. I yelled at the teacher telling her what they have done to me. Things like taking my school supplies, excluding me from activities, calling me names, and throwing things at me, along with other things. I told him how I was sick and tired of being blamed, that it was my fault I had no friends, when every single bully told people to avoid me. They invented this thing called the Katie touch. Like the cheese touch, but you could get the Katie touch if you talk to me. And I finished it by telling her that she was stupid and was too worried about losing school funding, that she didn't care what happened to her students. No one backed me up and nothing changed. I got a 3-day in school suspension and the bullying got worse. Kids would take my lunch and shoes, so I'd get in trouble for not wearing my indoor shoes, and I passed out one time from hunger and dehydration from not eating. I hated that school and am so glad I went to a junior high that didn't have anyone else there from mild elementary. To all teachers, just because a kid is always playing by themselves, it doesn't mean they like it that way. Also, if a kid tells you they are being bullied, then do something about it. I was severely bullied from my earliest memory all the way through high school. The times I remember snapping were these. 3rd grade, we were putting the chairs upside down onto the desks at the end of the day and this kid kept pushing my chair and pushing me. I turned around and shoved him as hard as I could with both hands and he fell onto the desk behind him. The chair fell off, he fell off onto the chair, and I got in trouble. 4th grade, at some Boy Scout thing and there were sodas. I got one out of the cooler and a kid who bullied me a lot grabbed it out of my hand and walked away. I grabbed another one and threw it at the back of his head. Got in trouble, of course. 7th or 8th grade, after being bullied incessantly, I lost it and was crying and screaming and punching the lockers and got in trouble for denting a couple of them. 9th or 10th grade, while on the bus, one of the bullies grabbed my comb out of my back pocket. He'd messed with me a lot. Rather than punching, for some reason I used my open hand to slap him really hard on top of his head. He was seated, and I was standing in the aisle. He complained of his neck hurting from it, and I got in trouble. Between each of these instances, I'd put up with constant bullying every day, and do nothing, and no teachers gave a shit. Bullies got away with bullying all the time, but even if I simply said leave me alone with a loud voice, I was in trouble. It never made sense to me. The bully would always grab my ass or slap my neck, say rude things about my nationality and insult me. I often told him to stop that, but he never did. For a year and a half. Once, in a lecture, he came to my desk and grabbed my ass. I had a really bad day that day too. The moment he grabbed my ass, I saw red. I was mad. I stood up and looked him in the eye. I took his head and smashed it against the wall with all I had. Nothing serious happened to him, except for the teacher being mad at him for bothering me. I was a quiet and good-hearted kid, and the teacher knew that. A group of boys thought it was hilarious to keep our football and stop us from getting it back after it rolled towards them on the school field. They kept passing it between themselves and picking it up and trying to keep it away from us. After trying for about a minute to get the ball from them by running after it, one of them picked the ball up and kept moving it away, trying to keep it out of my reach. I took a few steps back, no longer interested in trying to not hurt them, and did a goal kick on the ball. I kicked his hand in the process and the ball smacked him in the face and gave him a bloody nose. He didn't even try to react, he just turned and walked away with his tail between his legs. 5th grade. Can't remember what specifically caused me to snap, but after spending the last 5 years being continually harassed, bullied, and assaulted by a specific boy, I'd had enough. I calmly walked to the mounted pencil sharpener at the back of the class and sharpened my pencil to a very fine tip. Then, I walked behind said bully and in a downward motion, slashed him across the entirety of his back in one fluid motion. Obviously, I got a truckload of shit for what I did. Principal insinuated to my mother that the parents of the other boy may want to press charges for my harming of their pride and joy. My mother, bless her heart, retorted back, if that's the case, perhaps I should press charges considering how often my son has been coming home with cuts, bruises and welts administered at their boys' hands without repercussions from your staff. The principal moonwalked out of that conversation so fucking fast. I still was read the riot act at home, though. Got drilled into me that what I did was use a weapon to harm someone, and that it would never be tolerated at any level. Grounded for a very long time. Bully gave me space, for a while anyway. Went back to his usual torment after a couple weeks, minus any physical contact. This was in 7th grade I think. I threw a shoe at him in a change room. He was just picking on some random kid and I just had enough of his shit, and I completely missed him and hit the guy that he was picking on right in the face. Everyone froze for a second and then burst out into laughter, and the guy who was being picked on started crying, and I felt really bad because I meant to hit the bully. Shoes are hard to throw accurately, okay? I tried to tell him that it was for the bully, and I guess I calmed him down a little bit, also by apologizing profusely. After the incident, the mood in the change room was lightened and everyone started being more chill with each other, so I guess it was a success lol. In middle school we were hanging around before classes started, and this guy who used to be my friend came up behind me and put a condom in my mouth. I turned around, pushed him up against the wall, and punched him in the face. The whole school heard about it, and they were all backing me up for the rest of the day. I didn't even get in trouble. Edit, because I'm getting some upvotes, I'll expand a bit. He was super embarrassed and tried to negotiate with me, saying you have to let me punch you back to make up for it, or save his honor or some shit. People would not stop teasing him about it. I think that when the teachers heard about it, they thought it was funny, and I had a good rep with them, so they let it slide. I was in grade 9, had a French teacher who was a complete pushover. My friend and I were getting paper tossed at the backs of our heads by 3 popular guys plus GIRLS. I told the teacher what was happening. He turns to them, they stop, and he goes on his business. I go back to my seat, infuriated with the zero help I'm getting from the teacher, and, to nobody's surprise, the papers begin to fly once again. So I stand up, knocking my chair back, turn to the teacher, tell him, loudly, I'm going to the principal. Then, after storming to the door, I pause at it, turn to the popular squad and tell them, in front of the whole class who is staring at me, you are not getting away with this. Needless to say, they stopped after that, even though I'm pretty sure the principal did nothing. Goes to show how tough bullies really are. All they want is someone who doesn't fight/speak back. When I was in the 7th grade I got a 2-day suspension for fighting. We were playing kickball and this one kid, Alexis, was being a real dick with everyone. He was always an asshole to everyone, but he was being extra mean today. Purposely trying to beam them as pitcher and running into them trying to knock them over when he was taking a base. I'm playing second base at one point and he runs into me like that, knocks me back. He was pretty fat, so it was a hard hit, and I just lost it and got up and started throwing punches. The gym teacher came and broke us up right away and dragged us to the principal's office. The only thing he said to me was, "Man, you hit hard," and then he laughed. I'm lucky that it wasn't now, because I would have probably gotten expelled, but I got off with just 2 days of suspension. I explained to my parents why I was fighting, and they understood I was just standing up to an asshole. So I grew up moving around a lot with mom and dad. Unfortunately that meant being the new kid quite a bit. I was a pretty awkward kid, but I generally managed to make friends. Except one particular school. I was there for 3 years, which is the longest run at one elementary school I ever had. Anyways, the popular girls would bully me constantly. I was about 50 pounds soaking wet when I was younger and was on average skinnier than most. They would call me anorexic and ask why my parents starved me, etc. They didn't. My parents were and still are amazing. But one day the popular girl asked me to give her a push on the gliders. You'd hang on to a T-bar and push off from one, but platform to the next. Well, I pushed her really hard, and she fell off and broke her arm. I transferred schools the next week. This happened 6 years ago when I was in 5th grade and the bully was in 6th grade. I'd gotten to school a bit early and was just chilling on my phone when the bully came up and started ranting about how I couldn't be on my phone. Me, school hasn't even started yet. Besides, it's not your business. Bully, I'll go tell a teacher and they'll take your phone away. Childish, I know. Me, they won't care. School hasn't started yet. Just go away. He then reached for my phone. He literally tried to take it. Of course I didn't let him. I was getting really frustrated and told him, again, to go away. He didn't. He decided it was a good idea to fucking punch me in the face. I wasn't ready at all, so I didn't even have time to put my arms up or anything. Just a first straight to the face. Now, I was a pretty small girl back then, and the bully was a year older and apparently played a lot of sports and stuff, and on top of that he was standing up, and I was sitting down. I just snapped. Without even thinking, I just punched back as hard as I could. He just kinda stared at me before running off. I could literally hear him crying. He shouted at me that he'd tell a teacher, but no one mentioned it to me ever again, and I never got in trouble. The bully didn't bother me even once after that. Year 7. So I was 12. Part of the bullying included this other girl being a dick about getting into our lockers. She had the one next to me, and they were both on the ground, so we'd have to put our bags on the floor when we wanted to get into them. If she got there first, then I had to wait for her to finish before I could get to mine, but if I was there first, then she'd shove my bag out of the way and wouldn't be patient at all. It sounds unimportant now, but this wasn't the only thing that was going on. One day, she grabbed my bag and shoved it out of the way like normal, and I snapped. I yelled at her, explaining exactly how she had been being unfair and that she needed to make a fucking decision on which way it was gonna work and then stick to it. She and her friend literally had their mouths hanging open in shock, which is a sight I'll never forget, and the locker stopped being an issue after that. She decided on patience rather than shoving bags out of the way. I just wish I'd lost my shit at the Bullies more often. Maybe the rest of it would stopped sooner.